Quran has gone through a lot of transformation, a lot of changes has happened, and the Quran was canonized or standardized only for the world in 1985. That is only 3 years before I was born. So it's only 3 year old to me. So and this Quran was a Hafs Quran. This Hafs Quran was something which was conceived in the 10th century, and it is a different version. And the story goes back then to Cairo in 1924, when what happened? The whole Islamic University used to have the question on the Islamic theology and the stuff like that. And when people used to have different answer to the question because there were different versions of Quran, right? So then they say that we need to make a Quran standard. So they choose a Hafs Quran, and in 1924 it was adapted in the Egypt, and the same Hafs was later adopted for the world. So we have multiple versions of Quran written by multiple people, and that the question what you're pointing to, it really creates serious problem, and it really raises a concern that the text which itself is not standardized. And if you ask Islamic scholar that if I give you a blank paper, which version of Quran will you write, he will not be able to answer. He will either dodge it, or he will either just bluff it around that you don't know the Arabic. So that will happen, but no one on the earth can write a standard version of Quran for you. There are theories that maybe that Quran is uh, just not at all correct. Everything is fictional. There and actual theory should be that it's a tangled history, and a lot of things which happen in tangle. It's like a knot, and you have to just unknot it and just connect the dots in a right way and just get the line correct, and then you will exactly get how Islam evolved. So it's not the rejection of the Quran, but it's about understanding the Quran from the perspective the way it was written. Though it's very challenging, but we can definitely try out to do something. Yeah. So this was said by Al-Kindi. He was a 9th century philosopher, scholar. He was a Christian by faith, as I said, and he was housed in the house of the wisdom in Baghdad under the Abbasids. So so a Christian was there in the house of wisdom under the one of the caliphate, and he was talking about all these problems. So moving on to the thing, last we had discussed about that what were the fallacies in the Islam, standard narrative of the Islam, and why actually we need to really re-look into the whole idea that how Islam happened and the things like that. So then we further, when we discovered, when we further explored into the ideas, we came to know that perhaps it was a brawl among the Christians which had led to the creation of a new faith, and something like that might have just erupted. But there is a lot more than that. So I will just take you more through, and the thing, and the best part is that what I am referring here is not Quran largely, nor I am referring to the Hadith, but I'm rather referring to the primary sources which are still there in record, and which we exactly know that when they were written. Because Quran and Hadith, as I have explained earlier, also can be something on which you can raise a question upon, because you don't know the exact dates. We don't have the exact dating. We don't know the authors of it, who exactly wrote the stuff. Like Hadith also has got a lot of problems. So that's why I'm referring. So one of the thing that always comes, I have been referring to Bishop Sebius the testimonies quite often. And here again, I start off with Bishop Sebius saying, and Bishop Sebius was someone who was living in the 7th century, and he has documented extensively about Islam. So when you ask people that what happened to Islam, and perhaps there is no Islam, then they will come up with these sources. They will talk about Bishop Sebius and everyone else. And then further, when you dwell to look into that, what these guys are saying, it's astonishing, because then what it does is that it not only proves that yes, Islam was there was perhaps some Muhammad, but it just changes the narrative. The narrative is not exactly the way it was. So here, what we see is that, and the very notion of an ignorant origin of Quran does not withstand actually enough of scrutiny. This is what I must admit. And Sebas Bishop of the Bagatas wrote in 660s that Muhammad was not only an expert in Torah, but that he was in his mission to conquer the promised land, a redeemer of the Canaan and Jerusalem, as I say. So, who is the redeemer of Jerusalem and Canaan? Definitely the professed one. He's definitely a Jew, the Jew prophet, or someone who is going to redeem the land. So here I have just put across the quote, which will make the things very clear that if one wants to read it, he will get the hang of it also. So that's I've just put it. I'm not going to read it across, but I'm just giving a crux of it that this is what Sibius was trying to mean. And this this whole notion of a redeemer role might be a bit alluded in the Quran itself. And when Jesus, son of Mary, said, "Children of Israel, I am indeed the messenger of God of you, confirming the Torah that is before me, and giving good tidings of messenger who shall come after me, whose name shall be Ahmad." This is coming from Quran 61.6. Now the term is Ahmad. Now, if the two mysteries of the Quran's Ahmad and Al Mahdi in the 12th Shizam were carelessly combined, if you combine very carelessly, one would conclude that one would get into the horror of linguistics because and jump to the conclusion that a redeemer had indeed been expected. This is a conclusion which one might say reading this across. And perhaps I'm sure that many people know about the Ahmadiyya sect, wherein there's a mention of this Ahmad, and they say that the person who started the Ahmadiyya sect was this guy who is the promised one. Now, one could speculate that Ahmad, not Muhammad here, because it's written Ahmad, has a similar meaning as Masiha or the Christ, which is only marginally different from the prophecy in the book of John, where another parasletos should follow the parasletos Jesus. The parasletos is no one else but one who helps the messenger, someone who is like a helper, not exactly the somewhat. So, and Prophet Muhammad has been always called the seal of the prophet, that he's the final one. So, now the Hebrew word Masiha means the anointed one of the Lord, and that is this is the word rendered in actually in Greek as Christos. That is where from perhaps the idea of the Christ also came in. In Old Testament prophetic writing, it is used for the expected deliverer of the Jewish nation. Hence, turning the perspective to almost any view, Ahmad likely rests on a Judeo Christian foundation and is supposed to be an anointed redeemer of Israel, a function that may bear names with the same meaning. So, here what Sabius is trying to say, and also what Quran is meaning to say, what I read across so from 61.6, it's about the anointed person who is just supposed to come. Yeah. So, and I have been calling this thing history is jumbled. Yeah, and consistent with the Sebius notion that the ideas from the Edisa and constituted a handover, a verse in the cow. The cow is a chapter of the Quran, indicates that the power over the religion that had been transferred from the family tree of Isaac to the Ishmaelites. So the transfer happened from Isaac to the Ishmaelites, and this is what Quran 2.134 is existing. So Isaac's power had passed away, and of Abraham's sons, only one in the next in the line, his firstborn, that is Ishmael. While it's very tough to know that what exactly Sebos was trying to say or what was his agenda. An analysis of subtle differences between the biblical story of Joseph and one in the Quran also unmask biblical experts rather than some illiterate people that happen to have chanced upon the Bible. So a tradition attributes the first caliph, Abu Bakr, to the tribe of Joseph, that is the Isaac's grandson. This is very interesting. The importance of this caliph is that he is the first outside of Muhammad's family to accept Islam. While traditions remain inadmissible, the connection between Joseph and Abu Bakr is just one of those pieces of the majestic puzzle, and that are preferably ignored completely without a convincing rationale. We don't have any rationale. We just can't make that relation work out. However, not exploring this Pandora box is quite uncomfortable, though it defies the rationality and proper historical methodology. So, but we need to really look upon it that what probably would have been the notion that this idea of relation came in. It also leaves actually Muslims and the followers of other orthodoxies, or say the other Abrahamic faith, in the slumber of happy innocence and helps lighting the fuses of some of their more explosive zealots on a march toward yet another holocaust that can hopefully be avoided by constructing an insight into the mechanism of Judaism. So, if we really understand it, so a lot can be avoided and a lot of things will be much eased out. So, again, I'm saying I've been naming these things history is jumbled. So, again, I am taking the quote of the Coptic apocalypse of Pseudo-Sinite, who wrote down an after the fact prophecy about the incursion of the Ishmaelites. So this is what he's saying. So, what exactly is this prophecy speaking about? This prophecy is not only speaking about the Ishmaelite goal to rebuild the holy temple of Jerusalem, but also about their partners, the son of Esau. Esau was also a son of Abraham. So, here, this is particularly interesting clue to the origin of the Quraysh. It really gives you the hints for the Quraysh, who exactly were the Quraysh, because they shifted their lineage from the first biblical Jacob to the brother Esau. So this lineage was actually shifted. Bible is saying something else, and here you find something else. So both Jacob and Esau were the son of Isaac. Isaac was the son of Abraham. Significance is actually a symbolic disguise, if I have to say. Esau had been betrayed by Jacob. Please note it. Esau had been betrayed by Jacob of his birthright to inheritance of the Israel. This is what is said. And he had also married Ishmael's daughter. The concentration of the Messianic hopes around this time is connected to the prophecies of the 77s in the book of Daniel also, where an anointed one was expected to arise as a ruler. The Jews at the time were hopeful that the meaning of the Messiah 490 years after the third Jewish Roman war. This is a prophesy. So 490 years after the third Jewish Roman war. So third Roman Jewish war happened 135 AD. If you add 490 to 490 to it, you will get the year 625 AD. So the renaming of Muhammad, that is man of delights, and the birth of the prototype Quran needs also to be seen in the context of anticipation of the redemption of Israel and the arrival of the new king of the Jews. So this is very important. You have to see this arrival of the word Muhammad, the man of delights, and the prototype Quran, which is existing there. I'm calling it prototype because a lot happened after that. It needs to be seen in the context of the earlier prophecies, where in 625 a prophet is set to come, and someone who's gonna be redeemer. So moving on to the and I had initially quoted about Al-Kindi, and this is what it is. The He wrote an apology of it's called Apology of Al-Kindi, written at the court of Al-Mamum in circa AH, that's Islamic calendar 215. And he says, show me a proof or sign of a wonderful work done by your master Muhammad to certify his mission and to prove what he did in slaughter and rapine was like the other by divine command. The result of all of this is patent to you would have read the scriptures and see how in your book histories are all jumbled together, intermingled, and evidence that many different hands have been at work therein cause the discrepancies, adding to the cutting of whatever they liked or disliked are such now the conditions of the revelation sent down from the heavens. So, this man sitting in the house of wisdom of Baghdad in the ninth century under the Abbasids was questioning the Quran, and he was very apprehensive about it. Al-Kindi was of the opinion that Quran had been pieced together of different histories by number of authors. It would have been helpful if those polemics, polemics are the people who were actually the religious critics and of the other religion, included a discourse about some of the Quran's content, providing posterity with the clues about what those discrepancies included, but nothing happened. At the least, given the Aryan and the Jewish subtext in the Quran, there seems to be a room for interpretation and alternative scenarios. So that's what exactly we are doing. That we have got the Aryan or Jewish subtext in the Quran, which actually go hand in hand with what the Christians and the Syrians, the people, the Jewish people are talking. So that's why we are looking at it. However, Kindi has given us a clue over here. That clue is what I spoke at the beginning, that Quran is a jumble of histories rather than a plain fabrications. Hence, the task would be a path not followed here to untangle the Gordian knot rather than to discard it. So this man had given us a clue, and I'm just trying to work on the same clue. So the Kaaba in Makkah, which stood at least a century before Prophet Muhammad, as per the traditional view, was believed to having housed Christian memorabilia. Indeed, the Quran itself describes Makkah as Trinitarian. Actually, Quran does speak about Makkah as Trinitarian. There is a thought that whether it was pagan or something, but it does talk about the Trinitarian idea as well. And this is the Surah 37.149 to 151, which is speaking about that. So what is happening here is that it's that God should have begotten a son is a heart of the long-lasting conflict between the Byzantine Orthodoxy and Arianism. We saw it in the last talk. According to the John of Damascus, Orthodoxy and the Sabians at the time seem to have venerated saints as gods, also explaining the nature of what verse I have just put it across here. The presence of a female goddess Uzzah complicates the matter only for those that do not grasp the mother role in Makkah and elsewhere. Like, no one will talk about Uzzah in the Islamic narrative, but gives you a lot of clues. I will elaborate on it further. In Quran, Prophet Muhammad is believed to be portrayed as one of the messengers of God, but that's not always the case. And that's happening together with Jesus Christ, who is labeled as Son of Mary. The letters, that is the Christ designation, is a doctrinal classification for Aryan Christianity. We spoke about it in the last time, where Mary is not the mother of a god because Jesus is not the son of the God. So that's the doctrine of the Aryans. The Quran also singles Christians as particularly receptive to the new scripture. So, as I said last time also, that Quran is something which is always heard by people who know the Old Testament and the New Testament. And Quran 5.25 says that thou wilt surely will find the most hostile of men on the believers are the Jews and the idolaters, and thou wilt surely find the nearest of them in love to the believers and those who say we are Christians. That's because of some of them are priests and the monks, and they wax not proud. And when they hear what has been sent down to the messenger, thou seest that their eyes overflow with the tears because of the truth of recognize. So, idolaters here are the reference to the Byzantine Orthodoxy, and the Christian, which is referred to, is likely to the East Syrian Christians. I had explained this completely in the last talk, that how the issue of the Lakhmid and the Ghaznid arose, and the Persian were supporting the Lakhmids and the Byzantines were supporting the Ghaznids and all those things. So now, according to the tradition, when Prophet Muhammad entered the Kaaba, he was not cleaning out the pagan idols, but as per the tradition, but the Trinitarian Christian images of Abraham, Mary, and the symbol of Holy Spirit in the baptism of Jesus, a dove, and the others. This is what he actually had cleared off. Moving further, now Bukhari gives us a very interesting clue. He says that the Prophet entered the Kaaba and found it in pictures of Prophet Abraham and Mary. On that, he said, what is the matter with them? That is the Quraysh. They have already heard that angels do not enter a house in which there are pictures. Yet this is the picture of Abraham. And why is it depicted as practicing divination by arrows? I will tell you what this is. So this is a very inadmissible tradition, is a conflict with the idea of paganism and a text of what is in the brackets like Quraysh and the Prophet. hint at the later editions that seem to attempt clarifications of the passages that are today assumed to refer to the Quraysh. I said that Quraysh idea was also cooked up completely. So rather than an anti pagan campaign, one might read a Judaic sweep against idols into the story, foreshadowing the sectarian continuum with which the iconoclast controversy of the following century. And here, the word which we use, divination by arrows, is indeed the Judaic tradition in the context of Israel's redemption, and the practice would possibly continue elsewhere for some time. So it's actually there. It was a very Judaic tradition in terms of redeemer. So even Christians were having this belief of a redeemer, if I had to say. So again, this very important doctrine of Jacobi comes around 640 AD, and I say that's a problematic source because he says that he uses the term Saracen, and that creates a lot of confusion. A false prophet has appeared among the Saracens, right? The term is false prophet. They say that the prophet has appeared coming with the Saracens and is proclaiming the advent of anointed one who is to come. Anointed one, as I said, that this is completely based on the Jewish tradition that the one who will be the Redeemer. And there was a prophecy, right, which was supposed to happen after 490 years from 135 AD from the Jewish Roman War. So that's where it's continuing, and the proclaiming of the advent of anointed one who is to come. So I, Abraham, made inquiries and was told by those who had come, met him. There is no truth to be found in the so-called prophet, only bloodshed. For he says he has the keys of paradise, which is incredible. So many people would juxtapose that, this, hey, we have find the prophet Muhammad, but necessarily not, because Muhammad had different meanings, and also the text changed a lot with the time. So the text is actually referring to the anointed one, which is about to come, which is reference to either to the second coming of Jesus before the end of the days, or the appearance of a Messiah in the case of a paraclete. While the text fails to identify Muhammad, I definitely say that this text is failing to identify Muhammad. The primary sources seems to be in agreement that the Judaic sects were facing the end of the time, and the expected outcome is the same in both the cases, the redemption of Israel. So in all the cases, it was about the redemption of Israel. Without going into the complication of different Saracen groups, multiple contemporary prophets alongside Muhammad, and which parts of the Quran may have existed at the time, false prophet appearing with these tribes does not necessarily translate to the wholesome conversion of many possible Judaic sects to Islam. So that should not, because we are not speaking about Islam here. We're just talking about the prophet and someone who is a redeemer. So Islam doesn't talk about the redemption, right, of the way the Jews talk about. So maybe only the immediate followers of Muhammad had adopted a new doctrine that could have derived from a little as a sermon that had complemented the other scriptures such as Torah and one gospel and the New Testament. That might have just happened. I'm not very sure. That might have happened. But again, this character Muhammad is someone very, very unknown one. No one knows that who this guy is, and everyone is talking that this guy has appeared. But everyone is very keen to say about a one thing: the anointed one, the Messiah. And the Messiah, as I said earlier, Messiah is no one else but a person who will redeem the land of the Jews, who will get back what was prophesied. So we see a very curious thing which appears, and this is kind of a trade of inequality among the Christians. So it here again, I have last time also I quoted a lot about John Bishop from NICU, and I had also spoken about the fight among the Christians based on the idea of who this man Jesus is, or whether he's a God, son of God, or all these ideas. And further, in the 7th century also, John Bishop of NICU gives some very interesting testimonies. And he is actually the near contemporary prime source of unfolding the events during the Prophet Muhammad's lifetime and also after the death. But I have highlighted something in the red here. And the troubling issue is that the Chronicles chapters between 610 to 640 are missing. And that a Muslim Arab edition lies. So what you have now is a Muslim Arab edition. between the original and the exact Ethiopian translation. So this actually has brought a lot of trouble, and you can't just trust it blindly. Nevertheless, Bishop John attests to a Muslim conquest of Egypt with the help of Umar the Great. That is John, and it's written in 690 AD. He says that, and Amr the son of Al As sent a letter to Umar the son of Al Khattab in the province of Palestine to this effect: if thou dost not send Muslim reinforcement, I shall not be able to take the Misr. And he sent him 4,000 Muslim warriors. Now, in 690, the term Muslim has been quoted. So many people would believe that, hey, the Muslim has appeared, but I will even remove this myth in some time. So this probably is the first evidence of the presence of Muslim in the Syrian home territory of the upcoming Umayyad dynasty. Now I am using the term Muslim, but again, I it doesn't just hear this word out as a term Muslim, which has been used there. We will decode it later that what exactly this Muslim means. This Muslim necessarily doesn't mean the Muslim which has been told to you by the standard Islamic narrative. So modern translators have been taking the word like Saracens for Muslims outrightly, and this is out of an ignorance that Saracens means nothing other than Saracen, with its confusing with the pre-Muslim baggage. The way the history has been led, the assumption is made that if it's a Saracen, so he would be a Muslim outrightly. As I'm missing 30 years, we have got around 30 years missing between 610 to 640. What John Bishop of Niku says is indicate a brute force of elimination and inconvenient truths, and the bishop's text appears otherwise fairly consistent. The word might simply be a similarly innocent error, where the Arab word muzahirin might have morphed into Muslims instead of immigrates. Or if I take to, there's a very great Islamic scholar, Robert Kerr, he has said that let's call all them all Arabs. So Muzahirs is the Arabs because they have been, it comes from the people who used to migrate. And Hajj also is about the traveling. So Hagarin, so Magarin, and that is how the Muzahirin and all these things come. So it's about the immigrant. It has nothing to do with the theology of Islam per se. So the journey in the search for evidence might end at same junction. Only a couple of decades later in time, that it is more important that Amr al-As was the chief of the Muslims. Here, the Amr al-As has been seen as chief of the Muslim, not the Caliph Umar the Great. So Caliph Umar the Great is not the chief of the Muslim, but this guy Amr al-As is the chief. So the Caliph would have been the chief as per tradition. The Umar actually maintained, according, if I have to believe the tradition, Umar maintained a family ties to the Umayyads through marriage and was nicknamed the Redeemer as well. So he had got a nickname of being Redeemer, as if he was a Messiah, and that he had succeeded to redeem the Israel. So perhaps he had become a caliph to succeed the mission of Israel, being a redeemer. So these things are laying us a lot of clues about what was happening. So now again, the bishop, quoting bishop again, he puts the Muslim advance yet again into the context of religious strife within Byzantine Orthodoxy. And this is again coming from, these all are well documented and everything is available for record. And Amr left Lower Egypt and proceeded to war against Rif. He sent a few Muslims against the city of Antioch. And when the Muslims saw the weakness of the Romans and the hostility of the people of the emperor of Heraclius, because the persecution wherein with he had visited all the land of Egypt in regard to the Orthodox faith, at the investigation of Cyrus the Chalcedonian patriarch, they became bolder and stronger in the war. And you can read it across, right? So Bishop here appears to view Ismailites and Muslims as one. So he's seeing that Ismailites are the Muslims, and this, or maybe as maybe that one of them is a subset of each other. So whether Muslim is a subset of Ismailites or Ismailites are the subset of Muslim. So that is the perspective I get from what Bishop is trying to say. Now, one very interesting document is there that is called the Covenant of Umar or the Pact of Umar. Umar again was a caliph before Uthman. Uthman was a guy who is said to have, canonized the Quran and sent it out to different cities. And it all happened because a lot of versions of Quran were available here and there. So he thought that it's time to standardize it, and the text was canonized. And it said that it said, use the word said, that the Quran, what we have today, is the version of the Uthman, and all the Quran, different version of Quran, what you will get. First, they will say that it's the Uthmani Quran. When you will ask them that this is the version, this is the version, this is the version, then they will say, hey, that may be the case, but these all are the same as the version of Uthman. So before Uthman, we had got Umar. So, but the Pact of Umar is quite important, and is a document that is generally believed to contain redactions of the ninth century. It happened in the ninth century, to a treaty that may go back to a century earlier. So it was conceived in the ninth century, but the treaty happened a century earlier. Interesting. Yet, when evading the scholarly discussion of the document's purpose, or the evolution and examining the text as authentic in its core and isolated form from later interpretations, no effort was made to convert the residents of Syria to a specific faith, which is commonly attributed to Muslim custom. So the Syriac people were not being converted as per the pact, what appears to be in the record. So, but we know the Muslim custom, or rather, we know that how the Islam spread. We are told that it had spread through the power of sword. But the point is that with the power of sword, or the sword was really functioning here to convert the people, or the sword was functioning to convey something else, because probably the idea of Islam was not in place. So, and everyone was living together. The covenant or the pact confirmed the intention of a peaceful coexistence of believers from various Christian faiths in Jerusalem. As a matter of curiosity, it dubbed Elijah in the text. So we have also in the text of the covenant of Umar, we find the term Elijah. Elijah is nothing but the Elijah. Elijah is nothing but it means my God is Yahweh. Yahweh is the Judaic God, right? But possibly an Arabic form of Elysia, or named so far by Roman emperor had given this name. The Roman emperor's name was Hadrian. Yeah. So he uses the Christian God's name, not uses the Allah. Also, in moving further, so looking into the Covenant of Umar, these are the few texts which I have put across. Wherein, yes, I was talking about the Elijah was put across, and you can see that the man is. What is actually happening? This treaty, what you see in the front, established religious tolerance and respect among the believers of various faiths, as long as they believed in one God and were not Jews. So this is interesting. The Romans marked for expulsion and are meant to be those of the Byzantine Empire, who had tried to cleanse its population of those that did not adhere to the Chalcedonian Creed. And one scholar, Richard Bullitt, reasons that Umar's approach could have been a good strategy, same as what the Romans had been doing. So perhaps he was following the Roman idea. But then, why expel the Chalcedonians and not the Melkites? So here in this, what we see that the Chalcedonians are expelled, but not the Melkites. Why would the monastics Jews be targeted for continuing their ban from the Temple Mount that had been in place for over the century? So this brings a very curious question, that why the guy was giving a special favor to the Melkites and not to the Chalcedonians and the Jews, if that was the case. So this again gives you an idea that perhaps this guy Umar idea was very much on the line of the Melkites, or the Aryan, to a great extent, Aryan Christians. A 10th century Midashim text, if it is authentic, we have to, because it's available and it's dated 10th century, suggests from a Jewish point of view. So a Jewish point of view has been captured, that the Jews were engaged in a religious quarrel about Jerusalem with the Melkites of Umar. So Melkites of Umar. So it says may address the Melkites of Umar. So was this Umar following a Melkite Melkite faith, or was he really a Christian? So the doubt comes over here. So what it says, Israel will say to the king of Arabs, take silver and gold and leave the temple. The king of the Arabs will say, you have nothing to do with the temple. However, if you want, choose a specific as you did in the past, and we will also offer a sacrifice. And with the one whose sacrifice is accepted, we will all become one people. At that time, the Arabs will say to Israel, "Come and believe in our faith." But Israel will answer, "We will kill or be killed, but we will not deny our belief." At that time, swords will be drawn, bows will be strung, and arrows will be sent, and many will fall. So, even though Quran insists on a partnership with Jews, the primary sources seem to agree, although this source, what we just read it out, is that Jews were not so well in Jerusalem, but also the Temple of Mount was a vital component of the invaders' interest. That is, the people who we have been assuming to be the Muslims. It was of a great interest to them. So, according to the tradition, um, Umar distributed nascent Quran, which should have contained Prophet Muhammad's last sermon, the Way of Truth. These first edition would later be destroyed by Uthman. We all know this. Upon what it is in the book of the word of Allah. And now see, here it's very interesting that when these all, it has been quoted in the tradition that, and this is again coming from the Pact of Umar. Upon what is this in the book of the word of Allah? The book is called here the word of Allah, not the Quran. The term is not Quran here this time. The covenant of his messenger, of the Khalifa and the believers, if they, people of Ilaya, are told the believers here, right? In the Pact of Umar, the people of Ilaya cannot be the Muslims, right? By the, of course, they will be jumping off the thing. They will just make a thing that everyone is Abrahamic. So but actually they cannot be people of Ilaya. It cannot work there, right? So he is calling believers who are the people of Ilaya and gave them what was required of them of jizya. Now, this is interesting. The head text, the poll text, which is also known as jizya, was not an Islamic practice. If one looks into the past of the Middle East, Mediterranean, and all those areas, you will find that the jizya was standard practice under both the Byzantine and the Persian rule. And it was something that was not very unique to Islam. This is something, this is again a thing fed to you that in the standard Islamic narrative that something like that occurs. And yeah, it seems that the occupiers merely left the pre-existing tax system unchanged. So this was nothing Islamic about it, but it was just a existing practice. However, the core in Umar's covenant or the pact is that the greater Syria did not convert to Islam. Here represented with the holy city of Jerusalem, and that the name of the book of Allah remains elusive. So the book of Allah is what it is. It's not Quran. For centuries, Greater Syria was a hotbed of sectarian clashes over Judaic hair splits. All of a sudden, according to the Islamic tradition, they changed their heart and welcomed a new ideology without further ado in the midst of the religious world war. Yeah, it's called religious world war can be used because if you really look at the history of that place, all the Christians or all the Judaic sects were with swords against each other, and everyone was just trying to outdo the other. So they supposedly, so the people I'm talking about is supposedly embrace an ideology that was fundamentally opposed to their own way, not just in details, but in the central tenet to their understanding of Jesus' divinity. So much so that they would come to a view the emerging Muslims and the Antichrist, a symptom of the end of the world. So, no, again, I'm talking about the end of the world because based on a Judaic prophecy, which we spoke about earlier, that it has to be antichrist and because this is coming from the Jewish tradition and this is something which is to be a redeemer. So perhaps this idea of Muhammad was being cooked up through that the redeemer, and till now it's all about the people of Eliah, the people, the prophet who will be the redeemer, the Messiah, and things like that. So moving further, so again, I'm quoting John Bishop of Niku, and he talks about what's happening in Egypt, and he says that the story had unfolded quite differently, which was also busting with the Jews and the Christians. The testament of inhabitants of Egypt was distinct from Umar's concept of peace. So, what exactly Umar had said for the Melkite was not happening in Egypt. So we can read that now that the day of the festival of the Holy Resurrection, they released the Orthodox that they were in the prison, but the enemies of the Christ, as they were for the invaders, they did not let them go without first losing them, but they crossed them and cut off their hands. And so again, people will say this is a whole Umayyad trend of cutting off hands, and this practice was very common and something which really became very prevalent in the later Islamic part. But here, what is very interesting is that again, as John is saying, they have defied the church of unclean faith, and they have brought apostles and deeds of violence like the sect of the Arians. He's talking about the sect, like the sect of the Arians again. So they are believing in the idea of not looking at Jesus as the Son of God, and they are going into this practice. So, in contrast to Jerusalem, members of John's, that is the bishop which I was talking about, Orthodox in Egypt, were being mutilated. Their hands were being chopped, and the things like that. The discrepancy is an indication. So, there's a discrepancy in what Umar had said and what is happening. It gives an indication for the need to keep the various Christians, Jewish, and emerging Muslim sects and their geographical locations strictly apart when studying the evolution of Islam or the other Judaic. So it gives you a hint that perhaps the way that the discrimination was happening against the kind of Christians, it is setting a base for you to understand that perhaps Islam was just sprouting out of one of the sect of the Christianity that I strongly believe is the Aryan Christianity, and to Melkite to some extent, because they both followed almost similar ideas. So, as per the whatever research which have happened so far, it seems that Islam was just nothing but other identifying itself as a sectarian elements from the various royal contenders, and it was just placing itself in the phase in the 7th century when the Christians were being discriminated and there were a lot of inequalities. So, what should be our current approach? So, current approach should be to compare to the pretending. We should must actually pretend that the Christians and the Jewish sects during during the 6th century were simply Christians. And once you start understanding that, the whole idea of Islam will start unfolding. If you just look at the narrative that way. With such a view, we would also understand that nothing about the Reformation could even imagine unity. Because if John Bishop of Niku did not take a new faith of the Aryan, he at least thought that it was like Aryan Christianity. He had not taken the faith of the Aryan Christian, but he has stated that it was like Aryan Christianity. Just after just after before the mentioned passage, the bishop had also clarified that the newcomers through themselves are the servant of the Christ. He says that they are the servant of Christ as well, whoever are attacking. He later termed their belief faith of the beast, referring to Satan. But this does not represent a different opinion from what he thought of the Arians or anybody else who challenged his pre Chalcedonian Christian orthodoxy. So, if he's calling someone Satan, it doesn't mean that the person is not Christian. He had these views for the Christian who were not agreeing to the ideas what his orthodoxy was about. We need a new faith would be like Aryan because it not only consisted of an alliance of converging Jewish, Aryan, and semi-Aryan Christian sects, but also because it added a new doctrinal element, and that doctrinal element which had appeared right now was Muhammad. We don't have any reference for the life of Muhammad or anything as such because till now, because all these texts of Ibn Hisham to be precise, appeared in the 9th century, which is around two centuries after the alleged demise of Muhammad. There was no record of it. No one knows that who this man is. Just the term called Muhammad, which is floating everywhere around, but no one was interested to really chronicle the tale of this great man. Now, moving further. So again, in the 9th century, Bukhari has wrote something very interesting. So this is a session of Bukhari, and everyone knows that one of the first hadiths was compiled by Bukhari. And if people have missed the last talks, I'll just clarify that when Bukhari wrote these hadiths, he rejected almost 98.2% of the hadiths which were given to me. Hadiths are nothing but the sayings of Muhammad. And he chose to, out of this 6 lakh given hadiths, he chose to pen down only around 7 lakh or something, 7,000 or something, keeping away around 98%. So no one knows that who gave him authority to really judge upon that what is the authentic and what not after 200 years when he is not a first hand person to be in contact with Muhammad. Fair enough, whatever it may be, but coming back to our context here. In the 9th century, Bukhari wrote that a Christian had penned the surahs for Muhammad. This is very interesting. There was a Christian who embraced Islam. It's said that he embraced Islam and read Surat Al Baqarah, cow, and the Imran, the house of Imran. And he used to write the revelations for the Prophet. Later on, he returned to the Christianity again and he used to say, Muhammad knows nothing but what I have written for him. So, as a Christian, he has stated that it's a Christian, he has written, this Christian guy has written everything for Muhammad, but Muhammad knows nothing about it. He is completely unaware. So, in short, he is stating, Bukhari is stating that if this man has to be true, the Bukhari has not written that if this man has to be true, but if this man has to be true, so then in that case, Muhammad was not the messenger of God because he was not telling the truth. He knew nothing. But it's this Christian who is knowing everything. Then he says that then Allah caused him to die and the people buried him. But in the morning, they saw that the earth had thrown his body out. So this is very appalling, isn't it? That it means that somehow this man is very sinful in the eyes of this man who has written the Quran for him, right? And this becomes very problematic. This later tradition, because Bukhari is a later tradition, it came 2 centuries after that, I call it later tradition, seems to suggest the agreement with the bishop. So what we spoke about the bishop earlier is going in agreement. According to Bukhari, although only usable as literary evidence, sometimes we can use Bukhari as literary evidence sometimes. Somebody of a different creed had been working with Muhammad only to later part in a disagreement. So the Quran was being written by a man who was not of the same faith or the same idea of this so-called man Muhammad. So this is very interesting part. And so Bishop is saying something again around 670, around the 7th century. Bukhari is saying similar thing in the 9th century. So when you superimpose the two ideas, you get a lot of clues, right? And now I further move on. Now the time had come for the holy wars, and again, don't confuse it with the crusades as yet, or the jihad, something like that. So this holy war was among the Christians, and because there was no other faith except the Christians and Jews that time. There was no Islam that way. By the doctrine had not been set. So what happens? The Persian and the Arabian Christians had long before rejected the rule of Eastern Church in Cilicia, Ctesiphon, but the Ismailites helped strengthen their opposition. The Eastern Pontiffate. This is very interesting. Ishoiya III wrote in a letter to the Christians of Qatar. He writes this: not satisfied with the wickedness against the Church of God, your so called bishops extended the demonstration of the rebellion to the rulers there and to the chief ruler who is above the rulers of time. They rose up against the primacy of the Church of God, and they have now been scorned of the rulers as the beliefs as insubordination. So again, you can read this also. So what actually is happening? That we see assertion by someone addressing to the Christians of Qatar, and I will come back to it. So now, in order to follow the mainstream Muslim story, one has to ignore this Ishoyab's concerns that the Aryan bishops had rebelled against Pope, King, and Emperor. If you have to believe the standard Islamic tradition, so then this has to be lie. So either standard Islamic narrative is lie or this is lie. So whatever it may be. So let us assume for the time being that Muslim story is true and not this one is true. Now, according to the text, there was a schism in the Eastern Church, and it seems not impossible that Islam was superimposed onto it. Islam, as in the I'm using the term Islam, but assume the idea of the Antichrist idea and the way Arianism was coming up. The Islam was superimposed onto it. The like Aryans had essentially taken over most of the bishoprics in the Arab Peninsula, including Makkah, and it was then called Hasor actually. So that again is very interesting that where this Hasor is. They had refused to enter a compromise regarding the nature of the Jesus for centuries and were intent on defending their old version of like Aryan Christianity under the new leader under the possible pen name. So that is Muhammad. So they were trying to defend this idea of Aryanism under a pen name of a man. That is Muhammad that time because we don't have any history of this man by then. So it has to be seen as a pen name. Meanwhile, the past of the Eastern Church were already under the forced conversion to the Chalcedonian Creed through their bishops. In response, the like Arians seized those bishoprics loyal to them. So the old guard had acquired the rebellious and non-conciliatory approach towards their alien pontiff. The one large religious conflict that is documented in the historic record before the advent of Muslim tradition is between the Byzantine Orthodoxy, Melkite Christianity, and Melkite Christianity is nothing but almost similar to Arianism. So there was a fight, all of them, and perhaps this was the holy war which everyone is referring to. It provides for a contextual framework that a different scenario for Islam's beginning is not only possible but also probable because this is whatever is happening here, these guys are completely anti-Christ. These guys are subscribing to the idea of what Islam subscribes today. Of course they don't have a book called Quran right now completely, they don't have the history of Muhammad, but their ideas are exactly the way the Islam is functioning, right? So this gives you a very strong clue to. Now comes to the Uthman paradox. This is very interesting, and one really needs to look into it because and Umar the Great was the earlier caliph, and he was succeeded by Caliph Uthman, the first caliphal leader of the wealthy royal Umayyad family clan. According to the tradition, he was elected by the appointment. It's said that the Islamic tradition will tell you that he was, and that's how the whole idea of democracy comes in Islam. That even there are a lot of things, but when you read the very standard Islamic text, you get something very alarming and something very different. So I'm just quoting Bukhari again, the first hadith writer. And if you read it across, when he was buried, that is, the group recommended by the Umar held a meeting. Then Abdul Rahman said, reduce the candidates of rulership to three of you. Az-Zubair said, I give you my right to Ali. Talha said, I give up my right to Uthman. Said, I gave up my right to the Abdul Rahman bin Auf. Abdul Rahman then said to Uthman and Ali, now which of you are willing to give up his right to candidacy to that he may choose the better of the remaining of the two, bearing in the mind that Allah and Islam will be the witness. So both the sheikhs, that is Uthman and Ali, kept silent. Abdul Rahman then said, will you both leave this matter to me, and I take Allah as my witness that I will not choose but the better of you? They said, yes. So Abdul Rahman took the hand of one of them, that is Ali, and said, you are related to Allah's apostle and one of the earliest Muslims, as you know well. So I ask you by Allah to promise that if I select you as the ruler, you will do justice, and I will select Uthman as the ruler, and you will listen to him and obey him. Then he took the other, that is Uthman, aside and said the same to him. When Abdul Rahman secured their agreement to this covenant, that is pact, he said, O Uthman, raise your hand. So he, Abdul Rahman, gave him, Uthman, the solemn pledge. And then Ali gave him the pledge of allegiance. And then all of the Medina people gave him the pledge of allegiance. So it is very interesting. You need to really observe what is happening over here. It really, demolishes the idea of election. So it really shows you that how Uthman managed to become a caliph while there we don't have any evidence that the six parties mentioned were united with the idea that how all this thing happened, that because this is with reference to Allah, so this has to happen because I am the witness. So you see the kind of the reference of election, what has happened for Uthman. It's very interesting. And Uthman and Az-Zubair have always been the arch enemies. If you just look into the standard narrative, you will find it at least at some point of time. This text is taken at the face value. The Imam decided which one was to become the head of the state. If I put it very precisely, it was not by election. The importance of Uthman actually cannot be, you can't underestimate or can't understate it at all. Tradition from the 200 years after the fact states, again after 200 years, because all traditions or the scriptures were being written back then, that he put together and distributed the Quran, notably with the help of Al-Zubair. Al-Zubair is the person with the help of whom the Quran was circulated. And I spoke earlier that this man had burned across all the earlier Quran, which is supposed to have come through Umar. We will discuss further. The minor unsettling issue with Uthman is that he is neither part took in the critical battles alongside the Prophet. He was never in the part of any battle with Muhammad, to be precise, nor was he part of the plays of allegiance to the Muhammad. So you see, he is not at all have been a companion to Muhammad that way, but he has become a caliph on the saying of one of the Imam, right? And he has burned the old of the Quran as per tradition. So these are three very important clues which you need to bear in mind. Hence, it seems quite strange that there is no contemporary claim to Uthmanian problem. I don't know why Muslims never raise this issue. That no protests has happened whatsoever, no respective conflicts. Therefore, the distribution of Quran, whatever happened through him, is also very pious thing that he burned the older Quran and he just distributed, and he was no one, he was no way related that strongly to Muhammad as were others. So this is amazing paradox. This is a very interesting argument put by two scholars, Sadeghi and Bergman. They argue, this is very interesting, that how can one know that it was Uthman who sent the regional codices? The first argument for the concerns collective memories in the late first century and the early century, that is AH, 7th and 8th century AD, communities remembered having received the standard text from the Uthman. It was not only the different cities that had the same relocation, but also the different and at times clashing religious communities, including the Proto-Shiites and the Harigis. No one traced the standard version to a source other than Uthman. The elites did not ascribe to Ali. Even those who transmitted the variants found in non-standard codices, such as the Codex of Ibn Masud, did not dispute the Uthmanic origin of the standard version. So this way, you can the slide will be there till the time I explained. You can also read it through. It's very interesting. So following if I really follow the logic given by Sergei and Berman, the fate must be futile. It would have become futile, even though it represents a collective memory of miraculous event that did not happen actually. So the faith had broken. The modern scholars readily accept that the ancient Arabian Egyptian religions had served the elites to maintain power and were superimposed onto the pre-existing spiritual myths. We know about it. It is also common wisdom that Egyptian pharaohs had tried to erase the memory of entire godly dynasties, sometimes by chiseling out the faces, and in all other instances by raising the entire city. So pharaohs had been doing it. It was a very natural practice among the Egyptian to erase off the memories of the past of the gods, and just to take the ideas ahead. And and this is very interesting. I will just deviate and I will tell you one very interesting thing here. We will come back to it. And that if you look at the idea of cultural Marxism, also cultural Marxism, we have this idea that culture is nothing but it comes from the way the wealthy one try to set the society. They are the one who set the culture and tradition. It's somehow very synonymous to the ideas which has been happening over here. So this is what they saw in the past, and somehow because of this, the idea of culture came that way to the Marxists, or when the Gramsci first spoke about the base and how the economies emerged out of it and the things like that. So that's a different topic altogether, but I just thought of relating it, that how it works. So now coming back to the greater Judaic beliefs, we seem at a loss that similar mechanism might have been at work, and the evidence of God of the Israelites first appears thousands of years after human helpers had long created other supreme gods. So we have witnessed this as well. As And the people who really read the religions will know that given enough time and patience, the collective memory can indeed be shaped and reshaped. And especially in the Abrahamic ideas, it can really be shaped and reshaped the way you want to. And it has been happening depending on the thorough cleansing of the historic evidence, in particular pertaining to scriptural evidence that was done exclusively in the hands of the priestly elite that time, in the case of Abrahamic here. And the placement of the first traditions, the beliefs, could have been a single source that would have triggered a chain of shaping efforts. So in modern science, we see everything about to formalize just to how to this process best works when embedded in a familiar framework. So we can really, make a framework to understand it, how these things were happening. One can take this exercise as well. But yes, this was happening, and they were trying to erase the memory of the past. Nevertheless, in the absence of any evidence, it seems imaginable that the base Quran could have appeared around this time. Given the religious context, a standard Quran may have been distributed under rather than by Uthman. Hence, in order for a collective memory to change, little effort would have been needed into the mosques. Now here again, we are talking about the mosque. But what are these mosques? People do believe that mosques represent Islam, and there have been also idea that what is this Cheraman mosque? There have been a lot of thing about that. When someone says that Islam didn't exist, then what this mosque was doing from that period, or why Arabs were led to pray over here and like that. So there are various stories around it. But the fact is that this term here is how I thought of defining the mosque for everyone to understand. The Aramaic word mosque, is masjid, is for the place of worship and had been used since the 5th century BC. So it's being used since 5th century BC. It's nothing new. So, as per this Tiger Smith, Mumtaz Jafik, the mosque is the heart of the submission. And this is a reference is coming for them's work in 2006. Paraphrased, masjid derives from the word sajda, to bow down, to prostrate oneself. The earliest use of the verb is to be found in Aramic account of the papyrus of Ashikar from the Elephantine Islands dating to the 5th century BC. So that is where it's going back to. It's not very so. This mosque, which have been spoken about right now, from where this codex would have been transmitted or given to the various mosques, would have been just a place where people just come to do the sajda and pray, and it had nothing to do with Islam, because till then the idea of Islam is not very profoundly known, at least by the primary sources. So the major issue, what I see with Uthman, is that he supposedly had burned the Muhammad's original dictations of the Quran and the copies that had before been distributed by Umar. It prompts us to a suspicion that the collective memory had a single source at a bargaining table that was driven by a desire to posture with the unity, right? So, and this man just was trying to whitewash the what was the past. This amounts to destruction of Umar's authentic words from the God Himself. So, if I have to believe the sin that is standard Islamic narrative, then this man really erased the word of the God of the Allah Himself, not some mass prints that merited the. If it happens today, that would have led to riots and killings in modern times. The burial of Quran is an act of enmity, right? The incineration of the original is a declaration of a war. We have been seeing what has been happening. We saw what happened in Norway. There have been a lot of incidences around right now. So nothing happened over there. So it means the idea of Islam, which is existing right now, was not prevalent that time. Even though this man was very prominent, he was a prominent guy. He was a caliph, right? And he burned the world of. So why there was no rebellion? You just can't imagine that even if the president of the Turkey goes on to do something wrong against Islam, perhaps the whole Islamic regime might come against him, and we have seen in Turkey in the past as well, right? So, but it didn't happen back then. So, indeed, historic evidence is full of examples where Muslims would not dare to extinguish anything with the name of Allah on it. Absolutely not. And it was called the Book of Allah as recorded earlier. It was not called the Quran. Having destroyed, it creates either a paradox or is an expedient innovation, right? Either of the two things. It is a testament to a perplexing absence and to the post prophetic invention of a least parts of the Quran, a path not followed here. We don't follow this path anywhere anymore. However, we see that a person has been fighting to remove few verses, but things are not going so. And here the whole Quran was burnt, the word of Allah, and the new Quran was introduced. We don't know what exactly were the words of Allah, to be precise. However, it allows for a bold thesis. It gives you a chance to do a very bold thesis. It might be preferable to dismiss the collective memory of Uthman's involvement in the Quran in order to avoid the embarrassment of having destroyed the original holy book. So the other case happens, the other thesis can happen, then one can start exploring into whether really Uthman did it or not. Or this whole thing is completely cooked up, that Uthman codified and actually it's a completely cooked up story because you don't find any manuscript of Quran from that period. So it's very much jumbled up. Uthman was determined to establish actually a royal succession. He was establishing a royal succession. And we also saw that the way he was, brought and pictured by Imam and how it all happened. His half brothers were appointed to be the governor of Kufa. His first cousin became the top advisor to the caliph. And these all, what I am saying is as per the Islamic tradition. Usman's foster brother turned governor of Egypt, and the governorship of Syria was enlarged. So, what does this mean? The placing of relatives, right? It is not talking of democracy at all. Placing relatives in this visible top post sent out a clear message. And it seems to the result of an Umayyad conquest rather than an election by the giving up rights and forging concessions. Nothing like that. It was more of a conquest, the way Uthman was behaving. Building such a solid power base contradicts the previously stated election mechanism under what appears to be the formation of a Muslim theocracy. You are always told that the Muslim theocracy was based on the democratic ideas, and there have been multiple articles circulating around various papers that have. But this case of the Uthman paradox itself, falsifies everything. It rather seems to be a successful result after whatever Uthman did was rather a successful result of a declaration of a war. He was rather on a war against the people or the democracy. Now, this is an interesting assertion by Professor Oleg Graber. He was a great scholar. He was actually a student of, he's professor, but we call the user term student. So he was student of art and architecture. He has done a lot of research in the Islamic world, especially. So he says, and he has explained it quite well. The proper title for the leader of the Muslim community was, and this is very interesting, please note it down. The proper title for the leader of Muslim community was Khilafat Rasulullah, that is successor to the Prophet, not Khilafat Allah. The difference is hugely significant. The title Khalifat Rasulullah implies that the Caliph is simply a steward of Muhammad's legacy, a mere trustee of the prophetic state. By contrast, Khalifat Allah implies that the leader of the Muslims is very voice of God on earth invested with divine authority. In reality, every Muslim claimant to the caliphate from Uthman onward explicitly claimed to the status of Khalifat Allah. This is very interesting. Each leader argued, and their followers passionately believed that they spoke for God and dispensed the law of God. To reject God's chosen leader was to reject divine authority, isn't it? This is very interesting. So the use of term title Khalifat Allah by the Umayyads since Uthman suggests that forces were at play and they were not Muslims. If the Muslim idea is to have Khilafat Rasulullah. So I believe you are understanding what I'm trying to say, that these all people were not even following the idea which you are told that this was the Islam about, right? So Graber, actually this Professor Graber may have realized how close he was to the core of the issue. But it is remarkable that the Quran picks up Quran has actually given us the difference, and Quran also tells that what is the difference between the two things. And I'll just show that verse to you. In Surah 89.21 to 25, the Egyptian Pharaoh proclaims his own supreme divinity. This is what he has done. But he treated him as an impostor and repelled, then he turned. So he's basically trying to portray himself as Khilafat Allah, to be precise. Now you read the last verse. So the God visited to him the punishment of his life and to the other. Verily, herein is a lesson for them who had the fear of God. So, this verse is very critical. What does it show you? It seems to turn the text into an analogy to warn the contemporaries to refrain from lifting themselves to the status of Khilafat Allah, which would, one might suppose, introduce a sort of intercessor role between Caliph and the God. So that means this guy Uthman was not following Quran. So it gives you two cases: either Quran was not there, or he was not Muslim. So it's complete jumble of the situations altogether, right? So coming back to the Uthman paradox in the Surah 6.94, and now uh, are you come back to us alone, and we created you at first, and you leave behind you the good things which we had given you. You can read this through. So what this means? Yet the point is made exactly that there is no intercessors that had been regarded as the partners with the God. So that's a very clear thing. You cannot be Khilafat Allah. You can be Khilafat Rasulullah. You cannot be Khilafat Khalifat Allah. So this would not only introduce a paradox to the post-Mohammedan creation of this surah, and but also an extension of understanding of the associated role in the Quran beyond the narrow problem of Trinitarian beliefs, the rejection of Umayyad leaders being elevated to intercessors with the God. So I believe that you are getting fair amount of idea of what I'm trying to hint at. So now Ibn Ishaq has given again very interesting point. So he says that Uthman is a Christian. So it becomes more interesting. According to him, inadmissible as the evidence is the actors of the time were seeking the true religion of Abraham. So this is what comes from the biography of Muhammad Surat al-Rasulullah, which was actually compiled by Ibn Hisham based on the work of Ibn Ishaq. We don't have any work of Ibn Ishaq, but we keep on quoting as Ibn Ishaq because Ibn Hisham says that he has quoted Ibn Ishaq. So here you see few names. You see the name Warafun ibn Naful. You see the name Ubayd Allah ibn Jashan. You see the name Jayad. The three names have come in. So here it's spoken about Ubaydullah remained in doubt until after the revelation he made profession of Islam and went to Abyssinia, which is Ethiopia, the modern Ethiopia. But when he arrived there, he became a Christian and died, thus after having renounced Islam. Third, Uthman went to Byzantium, where he became a Christian and attained high office. The fourth man, Zayed, became neither Jew nor Christians, although he renounced the religion of the Quraysh and abandoned idols, blood, and sacrifices slain for the idols, and condemned the burning of life of female infants. So the Waraf was an alleged cousin of Muhammad's first wife. He was a Melkite priest, and and he emphasized on Torah. He used to talk about Torah a lot. Ubayd Allah ibn Jashm was a alleged brother of one of the Muhammad's wives. Jayad is believed to be an adopted son of Muhammad and a former Syrian slave. So all these guys were not Muslim; they were Christians. Ishak text suggests that Jair started out at Quraysh, right? He started at the Quraysh, Waraka and Uthman as a Melkite Christians, and Ubadullah probably as a Syrian Christian. So you don't see anything about. So this is coming from the biography of Muhammad, the most authentic thing which we have to believe, written 200 odd years after the alleged death of Muhammad. All agreed in their opposition against the creeds of the Fourth Ecumenical Council of Chalcedonian. So whatever, what is interesting that this Melkite, what Waraka and Uthman were, Ubadullah was again Christian. So Jayad started out as Quraysh, right? So all these ideas were against the idea of the Council of Chalcedon. Whatever the ideas of the foundation of Jesus Christ, what they had led, this was completely against it. One way how one can really reconcile Ishaq's version with the accepted history of Islam is to actually you have to you say that you just forget it. If you want to believe the tradition of the Islam, though it also comes from this book, again you have to believe that he's a liar. So this is these whole paradoxes makes these things very interesting, and they just don't work out. So again, Rome is in picture. So here, seemingly unrelated, another inner Christian religious conflict had taken place Constantinople and Rome, between the Constantinople and Rome. A greater Syria had broken off, and from Constantinople, so did the church in Rome. They are broken down. Trying to emancipate the church, Pope Martin I, who lived around the 7th century, and Maximus the Confessor, both the Eastern Christians, tore down the edicts of the Byzantine Empire and ended the issue of whether Jesus is alive, Jesus' will was divine, human, or both. So, in order to restore the obedience, the teenage emperor Constantine ordered for Pope Martin to be arrested. It seems that the Pope had been accused of conspiring with the Caliphate that time. So, what was existing that time? So, in the defense, the Pope says so. At no time did I send letters to the Saracens, nor, as some say, a statement as to what they should believe. Neither did I ever dispatch money, except only to those servants of God traveling to that place or to the sake of alms, and the little which we supplied to them was certainly not conveyed to the Saracens. So this is what he says in his defense. So obviously, the papacy in Rome was involved in a greater dispute between Byzantine Orthodoxy, Roman Christianity, Melkite Christianity, and which was like Arianism. Arianism had also have so they would have possibly aligned with the Saracens because their idea was against the Christendom, or their idea was completely antichrist or something like that. In order to get Rome in line, Greek puppet popes were dispatched from then onward, while they did not bother to describe their beliefs for centuries to come. The idea that the Western popes had tried to make friends with the Saracens you can't just ignore it. It was happening. After all, the Orthodox beliefs had before been imposed onto the people, and the Rome was not looking to very eager to do it, and also these were against the will of the Jesus, what people talk about most of the time. Pope Martin's letters suggest that their relations were at least friendly, if not very intimate, at least it would have been friendly. The danger may have been that the Vatican negotiated with the Saracens for a religious alliance against the Constantinople. So the Vatican was involved here to do something against the Constantinople here and trying to align with the Saracens, who are the Arabs here, Arab Christians to be precise, who were just on the verge of becoming Muslims. Pretending that the Umayyads would be of Melkite sect close to Pope Martin's pre-Herculean Eastern Church, but vehemently opposed to Orthodoxy, seems more logical than the assumption that dealing with a Muslim antichrist. That seems to be a more logical take for me. So we also see a incidence of internal jihad which was occurring, and what happens there is very interesting. So we already saw that how whole of a Rome, how the war between the Constantine and the church and the other church ideas were in the place, and they were trying to align with the Saracens. So somehow the stage was set for the Islam to spread, and perhaps with this the thing happening around the 7th century, the thing shaped at the Holy War, and the thing started engulfing drastically. Now, this is again furthermore interesting. There's a scholar called Robert Kerr. He says that the heretics are deceiving you. There happens what happens to the order of Arabs, which is certainly not the case. For Ishmaelite immigrants, that is Tayai immigrate, do not aid those who say that God, Lord of all, suffered and died. Here again, the term Magre has come. So it's important to go back to the Isho Yap's text, which we discussed that time. It relate to those who mentioned the Muslims in the doctrines. It actually gives you the clue. The word he used here was magare, which is now commonly translated as immigrates. So if you look for translations anywhere, you will find that it as immigrates. It represented in similar fashion in Greek as Magaratai, and in Arab as Muhazirin. However, that this means that Muslim implies an acceptance of the certain historical and doctrinal aspect of Islam that seem premature. It can be said that the group was riding under the flag of Tayaye Mahagre. So Tayaye Mahagre is very crucial because all these people are carrying the idea of being Tayaye. I had given a brief glimpse about Tayaye last time. That the Tayaye were the people who had migrated from the southern part of the Arabia towards the northern, and around second century. And the first reference to the presence of Muhammad also comes as a Tayaye, which when we speak about the war between the Romans or the Byzantine people and with the near the Gaza with the Persians. Here he has been told as the Muhammad Deep Tayaye. It means the Muhammad who belongs to Tayaye. So it also shapes Muhammad northward. It doesn't because Tayaye are the people who are living in the northern parts. This in turn would render a term Lakhmid or Ishmaelite immigrants exiled from Syria during the 6th century. And this has been actually discussed very detailed by the Robert Kerr in his discussion. So what happens is that this term Muslim has come from the term Maghreb, which happened to become Maghratai in the Greek, and in Arab it's called Muzarin. So it had nothing to do. So when you see the term Muslim appearing in the earlier text of the bishops and everyone, it's not talking about the Muslim as Muslim, what we know as, but it's talking about the immigrants, right? And we saw in the last lecture that how the Lakmites were with the people who were the immigrants who had migrated, and when the persecution was happening and they had to take, and when the Byzantine had forged an alliance with the Ghassanids, and the Lakhmid were get, and then the Lakhmid were supported by the Persians. So, and because the Lakhmids were subscribing to the idea of the Aryan Christianity, that is to see Jesus not as the Son of God and breaking the idea of Trinity, so the Persians supported them, and they started accepting the Persian idea. So somehow this Lakhmids started transforming into the Muslim. And here again, the Maghrib, which is being spoken about, and especially the Tayaye, this is again coming from the same thing. So those Lakhmids were the people who later on became the Umayyads, and the things went on and on. So here, what Robert Kerr is trying to say is that there were two separate groups, and so he further says that the calamities did not happen by the order of Syrian Arabs, but by the Ismailite immigrants. That's the Maghreb Tayayi. There are a series of different doctrines which have emerged, and also they conflict with the ideas, and they kind of at times mix this Islamite immigrants with the Arabians and the things as such. But what has remained common in all of them, that they all speak about the Melkites, and they speak about the Aryans, and they all are opposed to the Orthodox Christian in the Constantinople. So what happened? Ishayub also referred to a large presence of the pagans throughout the Middle East and confirmed the concept of relative religious freedom under the Umayyads. He has completely stated it. So, as for the Syrians, Arabs, to whom God has at that time given rule over the world, you know very well that they had to act towards us. Not only do they oppose Christianity, but they praise the faith, honor the priest and saints of our lords, and give us aid to the churches and the monasteries. Why then do our people of Oman reject their faith on a pretext of theirs? And this, when the people of Oman themselves admit that the Arabs have not compelled them to abandon their faith, but only asked them to give up the half of their possessions in order to keep their faith. Yet they forsook their faith, which is forever, and retained the half of their wealth, which is for the short time. This is what actually Ishoyab had said. So it seemed the Ishoyab was on a mission to win back the defecting bishoprics in the Arab Peninsula. He was just trying to get the faith back. As was shown, we spoke about it before, that only in Syria of that time were the Christians tolerated in the expressway. And Oman seems to have accepted the faith of the Umayyads. That is, we don't know their faith exactly, but whatever faith they were transforming to, so they had accepted it. And they had rejected the conversion to Byzantine Orthodoxy. Having said that, first Muhammad's relatives Ali was to wage a civil war against the Umayyads. According to tradition, this is what we are told. Assuming that they were united in one form or another before the advent of Ali, the latter, that is Ali, brought Syria under the allegiance, at least for a while. So we see that now this whole internal jihad is picking up among the Romans themselves, and we still see the no glimpse of Christianity or whatsoever. Then there is no glimpse of Islam or anything as such, because we don't even have seen what exactly is the Quran so far.
The face to my question is that conversion in India of Hindus to Islam and Christianity is their attack on our fault lines, in addition to allurements. My first question to you is to tell us the fault lines in Islam and Christianity to counter the conversion. Second question is give us link about the authentic Quran and Bible in English or Hindi language. Thank you.
I'll first answer the second part, that we don't have any authentic version of Quran as such. I'll tell you the reason for this. Because Quran has gone through a lot of transformation, a lot of changes has happened, and the Quran was canonized or standardized only for the world in 1985. That is only 3 years before I was born. So it's only 3 year old to me. So, and this Quran was a Hafs Quran. This Hafs Quran was something which was conceived in the 10th century, and it is a different version. And the story goes back then to Cairo in 1924, when what happened? The whole Islamic university used to have the question on the Islamic theology and the stuff like that. And when people used to have different answer to the question, because there were different versions of Quran, right? So then they say that we need to make a Quran standard. So they choose a Hafs Quran, and in 1924 it was adapted in the Egypt, and the same Hafs was later adopted for the world. So we have multiple versions of Quran written by multiple people, and that the question of what you're pointing to, it really creates serious problem, and it really raises a concern that the text which itself is not standardized. And if you ask an Islamic scholar that if I give you a blank paper, which version of Quran will you write, he will not be able to answer. He will either dodge it, or he will either just bluff it around that you don't know the Arabic. So that will happen. But no one on the earth can write a standard version of Quran for you. No one, no a single Islamic scholar, whoever it may be. I can put it on record. As far as the Bible are concerned, yes, we have some very authentic records which are which are now available to the archives of the British Library. We can get it online, and these are very much easily accessible. But again, there are various versions of it. And but what is one good thing is there in Bible, that when they did the corrections or mistakes were put across, so you can see that when the additions happen, they are written in some different kind of font or something like that. So you can see that where it happened. But when it comes to Quran, you just can't make out where the alterations were made. Where And there have been some very amazing studies where people have worked on the old manuscripts of Quran to see that how much overwriting had happened, and how much just they used to just erase it off and do a rewriting over it. There used to be a patchwork, and those have been documented. So it's very tough to find, and because it's very tough to find authentic version of Quran, it's very tough to really say that how good Muslim you are, because a Muslim needs to be defined by a Quran per se, the way it goes, and because it's a kind of a circle, and Quran itself is not defined, so it becomes very challenging. We don't know anything as such. So yes, I didn't wanted to say it, but of course this faith is having some serious problem because of the way the scriptures went ahead. Maybe something, I don't know what would be the way forward. Way forward only would be to bring the original history forward and let people accept that okay, it's your version, that's okay. It's your version, it's okay. But there won't be any concentrated idea of it, because there was no concentrated idea back then in 7th century, and we don't have a record of it. Coming back to the first part of it, it's very serious that the kind of conversion and the thing what we face through, and there's a fundamental reason to it. And I had explained it last time when I did the talk. I started off by saying that how this idea of the Abrahamic faith started. And the root goes back to Dasrajan Yudh, right? When the first migration happened, and then further a battle happened. And the battle was based on the ideas, because our dharmic idea was something different. The people differed, and when Raja Sudas came into being, and there was a migration which happened outward, and the people in the Persia and the people who started following the Zoroastrianism. And interestingly, the Zoroastrians too had a cyclic time initially. They also had the yugas initially. And when this happened, that further got corrupted to the Abrahamism. And then from Abrahamism, we also see that Jewish faith also did emerge out of first Yahwahism. First there was Yahwahism, then Yahwahism were idea where Yahweh was considered as a god, and rest all god were, you know, considered those gods are also important until it became Abrahamic. It became the Jew faith completely. Then Yahweh became the only god, and there is no other god, and something like that. And it happened around 1200 BC or something. And now all these ideas were very political in nature. After that, whatever it emerged, like how I narrated you the story of how Islam was happening and how these all things, you see a lot of politics over there, the control of the power. And you see that there are various kind of Christians who are not seeing Jesus as a son of God, are living very happily under the caliphs, while others are not. So there also we see a sense of so-called secularism, what people often talk about. The sense of secularism comes because only idea that one who agrees to the idea of Antichrist, they will go by them. Now, because of their political power, they keep on expanding, and they have to expand. And their doctrines are set that way because when you have got a political power, you will have a doctrine to control a thing. Like Marxism is a political power. So they do also have a doctrine. They need to work that way. And it is said that you have to spread, because in politics, there is nothing but the growth. In dharma, there is nothing called growth. Dharma is something which is very constant. So that is how we differ from them. Dharma is very and just to differ, just to give a very different kind of analogy, feminism is a political movement, while naritva is a very permanent thing which is always there. So this isms erupt. So like that, these guys, whoever are on the verge of conversion, they are following a political idea. So they will like to grow, and their growth model will be very unnatural, because this is not dharma. Dharma is very natural. So they will, and to counter it, we really need to reinforce back to our ideas that, of course, we have seen a disaster, but there is, of course, something that, we are still chanting the Rig Veda, which was written millenniums back. We still are the country. No other civilization had this legacy. We have done it, and we can still do it. And it will only happen if we can still go back to the roots. Like a kid, I always say a kid needs to be told when it goes to in a standard 11 that the calculus was given by Madhavacharya from Kerala. It's not Newton and Leibniz. He will start getting accentuated towards our dharmic values, and when we get accentuated toward dharmic values, the things will better. In Southeast Asia, we had spread while others were doing the crusades. How? Through the soft power. Singapore takes the name Singapura by. So there's a lot of soft power in our whole idea. So it will happen. We will have to really rectify ourselves. We are at the fault right now.
From Vivek Ranjanji, he says that as Abhasji mentioned that this is a jumbled history in one of his slides. So are the other scriptures the non-jumbled ones?
See, I'm not following the scriptures to be very precise, and I do follow the primary sources. So Quran is a book which has been compiled into a very small piece for you to tell the whole of a story, right? And then, but we have got a vast stretch of history. If you want to write a history of around, say, what happened in the 7th century, even for 50 years, you can't finish it. Like I'm trying to write a book on Babur, and I'm not unable to finish it. And right now I've crossed 400 pages, and still I'm unable to do it. So how can you concise that history into that small? The texts which I refer to, they are independent in themselves. Like if I'm talking about John, Bishop John, or if I'm talking about Bishop Sebius, so they have their own accounts of different things. They are talking about something, and those records exist. They are all there in the records right now. When it comes to Quran, you don't have any authentic record. You don't have a single manuscript. right? In the name of manuscript, the oldest manuscript which BBC just jumped upon quite back is the one which was appeared in Birmingham, but that's only 2 pages. 2 pages cannot be Quran, so we don't have any authentic sources for it. Second, they have tried to merge a lot of things. It was more of a not a very intelligent creation, if I have to say. It was more of a just keep on jumbling and mixing the thing. The purpose was something else. Purpose was just to go to collect any antichrist document what you can get and just collate it and just patch up into a book. It was a very sloppy book that way, and that's how it happened. So this jumbling has to be decoded with reference to the situations what match the other places. Like if Bukhari is saying something in the Hadith, for example, then if you see that Sebius record is matching, then you say, okay, this might be the true one. Because Sebius was writing exactly in the same time, but Bukhari was writing 200 years after that. Right. So that gives you a very fair amount of clue that how to really differentiate between the jumbled source and a very clean one.
Vivek Ranjan ji asks another question. He says, what is the ratio of similarity between the Bible and the Quran?
There is a lot of similarity actually, and but the more of a similarity goes in terms of the Old Testimony, because the idea was to keep the thing very antichrist to that great extent. And also what happens is that all the thing what has been referred is from Bible. So I would say that it's not exactly the similarity, rather I see that it's complete copy paste from the Bibles. Whatever is there, it's just some situation, the names have been changed and because of pronunciations and the stuff like that. Nothing more. It's just a copy of Bible to you. It's a very concise version. Like I said in the last presentation, it's a liturgical version. Like a liturgical study is something where you just take a keywords and something from a particular books and just compile together. So there is no point how much similar. It's exactly that, just read in a different language. When I say language, it also means a temperament and what you want to express.
Okay, Avasji, Vijay Raghavanji is asking, when will your books on the Mughals be released apart from the one being discussed now? And he requests you to translate your works in major Indian languages so everybody can benefit from it.
Yeah, Mughals, we are hoping to get it by this November or December. That's what the target is. And again, actually the things got delayed because of the COVID and a lot of things happened. Yeah, that's one thing. And the second is that, yes, attempt is definitely to get more and more books in the Indian languages. But as I said, that the problem is that we are at a very sorry state. Like, for example, I'll talk about Garuda Prakashan. Garuda Prakashan did a very smart initiative of translating a lot of books. But the kind of response what they're getting, I might sound a very business minded over there, but at the same time, you have to see that the publications like Garuda Prakashan or Indic houses, which don't have any support from anywhere else, or they really rely on the people. If the books are not really purchased in the bulk, and if the market is not, then sustenance becomes very challenging. So it has become quite a tough one. But this time I'm trying to, because this book is coming out of some affiliation with the foreign institutions as well. So I'm expecting that we will get in some translation. The major target is to get at least 3 South Indian languages, and at least get. I'm also targeting for Eastern languages like Bengali and also to look into the Odia to start with. This is the target for right now.
That sounds wonderful, Avasji. And I think you should also document the series that you've done in this talk into a book also. That would be highly beneficial. So I have a question from AB. He says, or she says, thank you for the presentation, Avasji. Religion may be seen as an ethos that is best understood at the time in which it is distributed amongst the community. With regards to the influence of political agenda and power acquisition, is it possible that prior to the canonized version of the Quran, there was a version of the Quran that was more well known?
No, there's nothing called. Actually, today I couldn't reach to the, because when I was speaking quite long, so uske baad काफी ज़्यादा हो गया. I couldn't stretch towards the Quran, but the story of Quran is also very interesting. It's not, there was nothing called Quran. Quran also comes from, like I said initially, it was called the word of Allah, the book of Allah. It had nothing to do with the. So we are now looking at Quran as a piece of book wherein few words are written there. So what you see it as, it was there in forms of various forms of Bibles, if I have to say, the other books, Judaic sect scriptures. But as a Quran, of course, there was no such thing as such, because this compilation happened very late.
The other part of his question was that the concept of a holy trinity, as you mentioned in the Kaaba, there was the trinity first. So he says the concept of a holy trinity is common to many religions, including Islam. Do you have any comment with respect to this similarity in ethos?
You see, because see, first of all, the similarity, if you start trying to dig a similarity, then you can make similarity and connect dots and find out anything. Like if you look at sky, and if you believe that I want to see this, you might even see that those clouds are behaving that way. So of course, but yes, logically speaking, there are certain similarities in terms of Trinitarian concept. Islam completely rejects the idea of Trinity. It doesn't accept it the way it has to be, because when the moment the Trinity comes in, the Islam just the foundation of Islam just demolishes, and that's why the verse of Quran, which is in the Dome of Rock, which was 691 AD. It happens to be Antichrist, anti-Trinitarian. So the first verse of Quran itself known has been anti-Trinitarian. And yes, the concept Trinity had been existing from long. Again, that because being an architect, I can tell you one thing, that people have been fascinated about 3 points. The geometry of the triangle, it has been very fascinating. And if you look for the older plans of long back, like the prehistoric times, what we call, we find a lot of the plans, the footprints drawn in triangular form, because triangle was considered as symbolically a stable form. Triangle was also considered as, somehow people had this idea of a spirit god, and that is how they used to link it. And our Trinity is something, we don't have Trinity, but something similar, and we have got some difference. It is largely about idea of looking at the symbols, nothing more, because all these ideas which erupted in the West were not very theological, they were not very dharmic in nature, but they were just a reaction to the society or reaction to what they saw around. And the conception of the God itself is very different over there.
Abhasji, namaste. Thank you so much for the talk. Every talk of yours, we actually need number of at least books and articles to read to actually understand a bit of it. My question would be probably a little different from what you have discussed today. So if you're going to cover it in the future sessions, you can of course ignore it. So whenever we talk about Islam, barring its origin, we see that the Turks play a very important role, right? So, and I always thought that Turks only came into picture when the Ottoman Empire came in. However, I was reading an article and I got to know that it goes way back when Arab had a fight with China, and I think Turks supported Arabs, and that is when the what do we call it? The joint venture started. And later on, because of their modern warfare, their courage, you can say, they actually rose to high powers and took over. Now, if that is true, again, what I have said could be incorrect. You can always correct me for that. But do you think that Islam would have spread so much and feared so much if not for, this Turk getting engaged? Because Arabs, yes, they have their tribes, they have their internal fights, but they're not known for warfare. Turks, yes, they are. So that is the first part. Do you think that Islam today would be the way it is if not for Turk joining it, you can say? And the second, because if you talk about India as well, the people who came here, they're called Mongols. They were not Mongols, right? They were Turks. And they derive a Mongolian ancestry. So when we look at this, and when we look at the whole colonization of Islam, we see that there's a deadly combination of three things there. One is the Western expansionism idea, to say that we want to colonize people. The warfare, which comes from Turks. And the bit of a addition to that will be the whole book, the Quran as a book. Because Turks in Asia were deadly, but the whole expansionism started when they became westernized. So today, when we look at Turks, they're not really Turks. they have this Greek ancestry. So do you think this is a deadly combination that we are facing today? And hence it becomes a challenge that it is not just an Arab concept anymore. It is now a global concept.
So, just to answer, you think first in regards to the Turks necessarily what people see today, they are not Turks. They are the people with ancestry from the Greece. And if one really captures how the peopling had happened, they will get even more clues. And yes, Turks were the most ravishing people. And initially, the Turks have fought against the Muslims as well, if I have to follow the standard narrative. And there's one very interesting aspect. One is the Turkestan, or one is the Tajikistan, is a place. This is different from the place of Turks. People at times consider that this Tajikistan, which has been spoken about, that is about the Turks also. But this Tajikistan is the land of Tayai. Tayai are the people who had migrated from the southern part of the Arabia towards the northern part in 2nd century AD. So they are the people who, and in fact, the document also say that Muhammad was one of the Tayai, or he was from one of the tribe. So that is one thing. Second thing is that yes, the Turks actually have this legacy of being great warriors, if I have to say, and they were two good warriors, and by the way they used to live, it was very nomadic process, and they were very barbaric in nature. And people were surprised to know that when you read the text of these people, and of course the best text to know about these people, nothing other than reading about the Turco-Mongols or the Turco-Mughals that way. So there you will know that they didn't have the concept of marriage at all. In all like if you open Babarnama, you will find that all the Turks, what they are doing, the women are just given and taken. There's no concept of the marriage. There's no institution of marriage as such, and it's very much celebrated. They also had this trend. So there's a lot of barbaric practices that used to exist. So with the power, because of the reason where they come from, and the reason really affects that how you grow and how you have this hereditary of getting into the activity. So warring was one of their activities, and with this barbaric nature, and when the Islam came in their hand, it became a very dangerous thing. It becomes a very dangerous weapon. And the Turks were feared of only one people, for the Mongols, right? And the Mongols were very, again, the Mongols or Turks are more or less very similar that way when it comes to really executing their ideas of anything. And whenever this combination of Islam got onto with Turks and the Mongols, it becomes very deadly. And that is why when people say that, see, Mughals, you rightly said, Mughals is not what they wanted them to be called. They wanted to call them as Tamuria, because Tamur was someone who was always considered to be that he is the one who's destined to be at the throne of India. That's why Babur wanted to conquer India, to be precise. And the Mongols were considered to be a very downgraded people. But then, of course, there was a marriage alliance, and Babur draws the maternal side from the Genghis Khan, and the paternal side from the Tamur. And what is very interesting, among all this lineage, if you read carefully, there is also intermixing of the Alexander. So that has also happened if you read the whole tree very carefully. So of all the hordes, though Mughals are considered to be very, the noble one, the moment you don't use the term Mongol and not the Turco-Mongol, you use the term Mughal, it looks very, elite and sab kuch bada acha lagta hai, and it goes. But they were very deadly combination of being the nomadic, barbaric, and at the same time, they had this weapon of really killing the people in the name of religion. So before the Mughals had come, there were a lot of devastations. But when the Mughals came, devastations increased, but they were very smart guys now. Because, and if one reads the administrative system of Mongols, Genghis Khan was a great administrator. Not many people know about it. Perhaps people would have always considered that he's a barbaric and whatnot, but he was a great administrator. He has got amazing brains. So this brain and this concept of the barbarian Turkic made a deadly combination. And more than Islam, what really did harm or a devastation was not the concept of Islam, but it was being the Turks, if I be very honest about it. And Islam fell into the wrong hands. of course, there's a lot of problems with Islam. I'll not say that it's way right, but Islam really fell in a very wrong hands, and they caused a lot of devastation. And in future also, the current Turks, who are not actually Turks, would be the most dangerous people, if I have to say, in combination of the geopolitics given.
And what do you think is the contribution of West per se? And when I say West, I'm talking about the European agenda, because the whole colonization actually started happening when Turks met with, you can say, the Greek ancestry. Because before that it was barbarian, before that it was looting, before that it was, killing. But then this whole concept that let's convert people, let's go and capture places, let's go and capture property. Do you think that happened when this concept met with the Western colonization concept, or as we call expansionism?
This is again a concept which has been bred into the very the neo-Marxist books, and that is how they take the narrative. But if you look at this whole Mediterranean belt and the people of Middle East and also the people of the West at the same time, these all people were very expansionist by nature, all of them. And in fact, our neighbor China was very expansionist. In fact, the whole concept, they work on a concept wherein they have this birthright to capture whole of the world. That's how China also works, and it goes back to 2nd century BC, right? So this whole idea of expansionism was there in everyone except for the Indians, for some sort of region, except for the Cholas. And Cholas was also more of a diplomacy. It was something very different. It was not the way the other people expanded. So I don't believe that while they really got in touch with the Greeks, or when this amalgamation happened, that brought the idea of expansionism, because they were expanding before then as well. There is a traces of their expansion very well documented, and so were the Mongols, Turks, and and Arabs were some. We kind of don't get much idea about the Arabs because we don't have much of documents about them. But when you look at the documents of these Jesuits, or when you talk about the documents of the Syriac documents, what the bishop is saying, then you see that even these Arabs were no less, and they were just looking to expand. And the Western expansionism had this root in the idea of expansion of Christendom initially. The Turks really followed the same principle, and now they had got Islam. So with the help of, or rather what you can say, with the ideas being taken from the West, because they had learned quite well that how the things needs to be done, they were more polished and they were very crisp about the idea. Because the Greeks, of course, were, you can say that after Indian civilization, if one civilization had such a meticulously, then it was the Greeks and the Romans, no one else, right? So of course they had that with them, but Islam really made it more dangerous, because Islam comes up with the idea. Islam is currently one faith which gives you total solution. And when you got total solution, it means that you are totalitarian. Like when someone is saying that how to eat, how to, everything. So it comes with a doctrine, but when it got to the Turks, who itself were barbaric, and then they also got the things from the West, like the colonialism from the Greeks, it became a lethal combination. This was fortunate that Mongols didn't got it that way. Otherwise, they would have been the most ravishing one.
Abbasji, my third question would be, it's in current context, so you can of course ignore if it is not related to today's topic, because today is more about history. Now, in this day and age where we have internet, we can read, they also know where the Muslim Holy Land is. Why do you think that the Muslims of Indian subcontinent still have their allegiance with the Turks, which means today's Turkey, and not with the Saudis for that matter, or anywhere in Arab? So they are today a convenient rich auntie who they know that can give them money in need. So that is the only reason why they have this allegiance. But then the religious allegiance is still with Turkey. Why do you think that is? And it is, I'm not just talking about common people, I'm talking about the Maulvis and the scholars. And it's such that today the Arabs sometimes are called Baddu, not on an official channel, but otherwise they're called Baddu. It is not really a slang, but it's a nomad tribe, if I'm not wrong. Is that allegiance still there? This confusion.
So it's very, very simple. See, like I told you that the first guy to burn the Quran was Arab, isn't it? And it was Uthman. who burnt it. And if you see the Arab society that time, what we have been told through the primary sources, this society was just trying to sustain together, just being antichrist. That was their doctrine, nothing else. It was nothing was about Allah, and there was nothing. So, and Arabs were definitely evolving. They were just getting civilized because there was no hint of civilization in Arabia back then. Like people say that Makkah is a mother of civilization, but there is no hint of it being civilization until 5th, 6th century. Forget about it being mother of civilization. So Arabs definitely were not very progressive. They were not progressed that time. They were not so staunch Muslims per se, what they were. And I do believe that that is the tradition what they have carried. And in fact, the even when it comes to the Indian invasions, what happened over us, it was not so deadly by the Arabs because in fact, I do believe that Muhammad bin Qasim's story is also a cooked up one because we don't have any primary source for it. You hear about it from Chachinama, which was written 500 years after. So our Muhammad's story was written 200 years after. Our Muhammad bin Qasim's story was written 500 years after Chachinama. Chachinama says that it too had a reference, but where is that reference? No one knows about it. So, Arabs, I see that they always have been a kind of a docile people. Of course, they had ambitions and things like that, and of course, that would have been there. But when it comes to the virtue of the nature, who they are, then Turks have been the way they have been always, and they are the one who can always be. Arabs will not come and say that let's convert this church to mosque, or he'll not say that let's convert this temple to thing like that. But Turk will be very open about it, and we have been seeing it very historically. All the ravishing and the marauding job which was done in India too historically was done by the Turks, not by the Arabs that way, not to that extent. So there's a civilizational difference, and people also know it, and they do show the allegiance only for the fact that it all comes to the caliphate, and that once the caliphate was passed on to the Turks that time when they took over. And I don't know how many people know about it, the Osman one who crafted this empire, Ottoman. Osman is again the name coming from the Caliph Usman, and we've discussed a whole stretch about this Uthman, right? So a lot of things come from it. He was the guy who had burned the Quran too, right? And he's the guy who had been dictatorial when we talk about a democracy in Islam. So you see, there's a lot of dots to connect, and it really sets a very precedent. They know their books very well. They know that where they are going to. Now, Saudi prince is not gonna come and raise and say that I will not let this temple built, and they have been like that from very beginning. Let's not crib about them. People crib about the Saudis also, but they have been their people. Of course, they are inside job doers, but that's a different thing. But as civilization, Arabs have not been that bad as how has been the Turks. And of course, they will need that bad one because they want Darul Islam. They don't want Darul Harab all the time.
Thank you for this wonderful talk today. So I have one question. Is left and Islam basically, are they conveniently wedded to each other, or it's only on the surface this alliance, and if you scratch below they are again anti to each other?
See, no communist can be with Islam or Christianity, or no Islam or Christianity can be with each other, nor Islam or Christianity can be with communist, if I be very precise and very clear about it. So what you see today is completely a facade which is set to counter a common enemy, what they see it as. And that common enemy definitely is the Indic idea, because like I always say, that it's only Indic civilization which still has been chanting the same hymn which was written so many millennia back. No other civilization have had that power. Every civilization converted, but not India. Of course, there was something over here, because the reason being that we are a dharmic people. There's a difference between dharma and religion. We all would have known it by this time, that everyone has spoken about it. So what it does, that we are the follower of the natural processes. We are the follower, worshipper of the nature. You don't have any, like Bhagavad Gita also says at times that you did not really know the Vedas to really be dharmic, right? It's your karma and the things which can make you a great one and can connect you to the Paramatma. Or so it is something which is very different altogether. So that is the reason why all these all so it's important to erase the existence of the Hindus that way. Until it is not done, now the communist can work, because the communists can erase the Islamists can erase the communists, and this trinity of the Christian, Islam, and the communists can work all in total. It can really work well. And if you just recall the history a bit, if you read about the Soviet has massacred so many Christians, and Soviet has massacred so many Muslims. Still, the persecution of Muslim is happening in China, but they will not raise a very strong word. They all were so strongly against something what happened in Paris, right? But no one has been raising such kind of protest in against what's happening in China. No, you have voices, you have seen voices, but you don't have that many voices. Everyone is just trying to play the game of the convenience. It's just a game, or it's just a marriage of convenience, nothing else, and the things will just go off. It will. We will never let it happen, but of course, once this happens, communists will take over all of it.
Just an observation made from the answer and the discussion that was going on right now between you and the person. About the Arabs. There's no denying that they did do invasions as well. They were not as organized as the Turks, but they were equally pretty violent and very violent marauders. That's been their history, this constant infighting of Arab tribes. And Muhammad Qasim did invade Sindh thrice, if I'm not wrong. They were pretty barbaric invasions. So there's no denying what Muhammad achieved in making Islam is actually united all these disparate Arab tribes, which until then had never been united. They had different concepts. I remember reading in Joseph Anton by Salman Rushdie about how what you are mentioning about this whole thing being so disorganized, the Quran or even texts associated, that his father apparently wanted to have an organized sort of setup where it goes more sequentially. Otherwise, the Quran as it is right now has no sequence. It's really got no head or tail. It just goes here and there and everywhere. That's how I got to know that it was that. And he said his father actually wanted to do that. But coming back to what I was saying, there's no denying that the Arabs were, not as, effective, if you have to call it, in violence as the Turks, but were quite bad. And Muhammad achieved what nobody else had, that he actually brought them together. And I can say there's a certain amount of surety because I've lived in the Middle East and my father has been there for decades. So we actually know of people who, no matter how wealthy they were, they would still, they have these gold teapoys which are made of pure gold. I'm talking about like how many decades ago, and they would have bakra tied next to it, kind of thing. So I see, they are like that. Like the Bedouins, the way they drive, there is a certain way that the Bedouins still drive. So they were a disparate of people. And Muhammad achieved this, which is why I remember, I think it was probably 15 years ago or maybe more, that Muhammad is actually classified as the most powerful man in history, among the 100 most powerful characters in history. You may recall reading that. And that was quite surprising to many people. Why? Why? Because what he achieved was this. And with this, there was this whole world takeover. Nearly got Europe, but didn't quite, but the rest of Asia, as we know. So my observation was just that I think now Arabs are waning, yes, and Turkey is back to getting its caliphate, and it's going to be the 100th year and on. But yeah, there's no denying the Arab violence and the influence of Islam in organizing them, I think. Just an observation.
So I'll just add a bit to it. So what actually happens is that according to my studies now, there was no Muhammad bin Qasim. And this story has also been cooked by Abbasids, and rather the Turks, when Chanchanama was commissioned. So Muhammad bin Qasim is said to have invaded finally in 712 AD. The first reference of Arabic invasions appears in 895 or 893 by Bahaduri. So writing was very much available for every one of them, and everyone was writing every kind of stories. Bishop was capturing so many tales. But it took 180 years to talk about the campaign of Sindh to start off with. Then that time the Muhammad bin Qasim has still not been spoken. Then it was in 2 years after that, one more text came. It was again under the Abbasid reign. Then a bit detail of biography of bin Qasim is introduced. A bit detail, like 2-3 lines, something like that. But Chachnama is commissioned finally, 500 years after it. Then the whole story of bin Qasim has been written, that how the 17-year-old guy. Now, this guy is supposed to be coming from Hijaz, Makkah. Now, we don't have Makkah in any map till 900 AD. Makkah is for the first time spoken in 741 AD in a document. For the first time, it appears there. So this whole story or the episode was cooked up to really give a, because that was the era of invasions, and the more you invade, the more powerful you show. So all these Abbasids, and Abbasids were a very smart people after the Umayyads Abbasids came. So what they used to do that like of course they commissioned the Quran. Quran was being written, the Hadiths were being written, and interestingly, what you observed in Hadiths is that all the Hadiths were associated with either the slave family or someone from the slave. So Hadiths were being written as a redemption. And why they were being written? Because a story of a prophet was being created. Because we don't have any historical evidences for whatsoever if this man existed the way the classical tale tells us. This man never. That's why I use the word pen name Muhammad, because Muhammad also had got various meanings and various such things. So then the hadith was also being created, and that is why the first thing appears that Bukhari, who wrote the first hadith, he was given 7 lakh, 6 lakh hadiths. He rejected 98.2% and wrote only 7,000. So our interest should be to know what was on 98.2%, what that this man Bukhari rejected 200 years after when Muhammad would have died. So it means that the story. Now, Ibn Ishaq is one who is said to have written the first biography of Muhammad. We don't have any record of it, but we are told about him from Ibn Hisham, whose book is available, which was written in 9th century as well. Now, again, 200 years after, and all these are happening during the Abbasids. So I'm just trying to tell that stories was being created by the Abbasids. And there's a whole record that the more and more wars on which this Abbasids used to go, the more the writing used to happen, because this writings were like the tool for them. And there's a very interesting anecdote that why Hadith is so embarrassing for Muhammad, because Hadith seems to be very embarrassing. So there's a thesis on this idea that it was done deliberately to engage the people. A lot of embarrassment which has been brought to Muhammad, like no one will like to embarrass the apostle of God that way. So it was also cooked up that way. So Makkah was cooked up. The story of the Muhammad was cooked up. The story of all the conquest was cooked up because this Muhammad was also was in the northern part. He was not in the southern part actually, as per the document. The first reference to talk about Muhammad appears in 640 AD, and that document is kept in British Library as a first page in front of a gospel. Just one page is there. It talks about the incidents where in 634 the Tayyaye, the Muhammad the Tayyaye, that means the Tayyaye belonging to Muhammad attack, and the Tayyaye people are living up front. So this Muhammad is actually belonging there. He's not from this part, the southern part. He's definitely somewhere around Iraq or Syria or perhaps near the Turk or somewhere else. So he actually, there's a whole Arabic book about Muhammad is from Syria or something. I just forgot the name of the book. And it is an Arabic book, very interestingly. It's written in Arabic. We do have a translated version of it also right now. So this whole thesis was completely flawed and put upon us to make us believe that the foundation of Islam itself was too strong. Though we are finding that even this guy Uthman, the most important caliph, is a Christian. This Ibn Isham is writing. So this whole story is so jumbled up, and the way it has been given. Yes, Arabs were also marauders, no doubts about it. But the marauding intensified when they, got in interaction with the Turks, because there was the whole this idea of the Islam was erupting around 8th and 9th century, and it was happening in the northern Iraq or somewhere around that, where there's a lot of places where the studies of the Old Testament and all those things used to happen. The Turks also used to interact, and a lot of things were happening. A lot of interaction happened, and perhaps that made the situation that bad over there. So that's how I think it happened, and that's my thesis about it.
What I found was that the consumption, right, the consumption of the content that is being generated. You spoke about the book being 400 pages and still not complete, right? Today's generation, because I've been helping start a lot of schools for the art of living, and a lot of identifying how we can communicate the history in the right way to students, because that's where the education starts, found that you have to give it to them in the way they can consume. So is it possible that probably Garuda Prakashan and the Indic Academy starts producing smaller and smaller chapters probably and showing the interest, and so it continues? It's like a serial that you watch on TV, that you have only smaller bits, and it keeps people engrossed so that they can continue to read it over a period of time instead of reading everything at once. Because even when you publish a book, it's very expensive to publish the book in different languages, right? But I worked in CDAC before, so we had this translation technology to take from English to other languages, even with subtitles. So if we can do this and allow consumption in smaller and smaller pitches, I think people will every day come read it and then keep them engaged. So maybe, do you think we should think something like that so that we can get more people to consume this information?
Yeah, definitely. One of the initiative has been taken where Alamgiri is being translated, and it's being done by Sanjay Dikshit, and he has taken up the project. And I think more and more such thing will start happening, because right now we have just started to touch the surface. I will not even say the scratch. We have just touched the surface. We have not even scratched the surface. So there's a lot to go in, and like I said, that I don't agree with the narrative itself that Bin Qasim had invaded India. So and if Bin Qasim didn't invade India, the whole thing is gonna change from there. The history is gonna change till the Mughals. So there's a lot of I see this as a black hole process where when we get in, we don't know where we will come out. A lot needs to be done, and a lot of people need to shift their attention from, we see that there, a lot of people want to criticize the faiths and other things, but that is not gonna help you at all. The idea is that you need to get into the academic, read the books, translate, debate, discuss. That's the only way out, right? And I do believe that though we have potential, we are losing on this idea to debate, engage, and produce the documents. Rather, I always say we are more activist, less on activity. Activity बहुत कम है, हम activism बहुत करते हैं, whether you see it on Twitter, Facebook, anywhere. So we will have to reduce it, and perhaps if that happens, something needs to be done. Of course, we at Garuda had a discussion about it as well as something needs to be done. Hoping that in some days something might just turn out.
And Gayatri, we had a wonderful presentation, and your research, I feel very thankful for that. But my question is slightly different. I would like to see your research as an architect and urban designer in the field of temple architecture, because I personally know that Indian architecture has been rubbish in our academia, as we have a 7-course meal of the Greek and Roman architecture, and Indian architecture is really demeaned by calling it a Trabeat style and not very important, just rock sculpture. That's the way they are called. So I would like to see you doing some good research on that, and the urban planning, like we had temple-based cities, temple towns. So a good well-planned layout system, and we have lots of well-organized sort of set, but that is being completely rubbish. So I would like to see you doing some good research on that. Even I can collaborate. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.